Hi guys, welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things books. My name is Chloe if you're new here, and it's great to have you. Now, I'll be honest, as a fantasy reader, I don't often reach for romance books. I crave epic worlds and high stakes and magic, but every now and then a romance book just hits. So today I wanted to talk about 9 romance books that I actually enjoyed as a fantasy reader. So if you're normally a fantasy reader like me but occasionally dip into some romance, then you might also enjoy some of the books on this list. So grab your favourite drink and let's get into it. The first book I want to talk about is One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Now, I want to preface this by saying that there are 2 of her books on this list. However, I love everything that woman puts out. I would read her shopping list if she published it, so I tried to limit myself to only 2, and I have done that. But just know, I love all of her books, but this one in particular is absolutely gorgeous. This is about a woman called Emma who thought that her husband died in a tragic accident, until years later, when she's finally starting to move on and rebuild her life, he's found alive. So she has to choose between her first love and the new love that she has built in his absence. This book had me utterly devastated, but in the best way. It felt less like a romance and more like just a gut-wrenching journey about grief and love and second chances. It really does make you think, do we only have one true love? So if you like books that make you feel something, this one is a must. I think it's great for people who don't necessarily gravitate towards romance books because it's not so much about the romance itself so much as the character's journey through this awful situation that she's found herself in. So it's a masterpiece. Please read it. My next TJR book then is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, of course, because how could you not pick this book? It is fabulous. So this is about legendary Hollywood actress Evelyn Hugo, of course, who finally decides to do a tell-all interview where she spills the tea on her scandalous life, including her 7 marriages. This book, it's so good. It's a romance, but it's so much more. It's old Hollywood glamour and secrets and a deeply emotional love story that unfolds in just such a compelling way. Evelyn Hugo is one of the most complex and interesting characters that I had read about in such a long time when I picked this book up. And I think the way that Taylor Jenkins Reid weaves her life story is just chef kiss. The twist at the end as well is just so beautifully written, and I loved everything about this story. It really does feel like you're reading an old Hollywood star's biography. It's fantastic. I actually had to Google at one point to see if this woman was real. So again, highly recommend. If you haven't read this, pick it up. It's another one that I really like because it's not so focused on the romance so much as it is about the character and her life and how she got to where she is as well. The romance is just very subtly woven in throughout it as well. It's beautifully done. So please do yourself a favour and read this book, or just anything that Taylor Jenkins Reid puts out, because they're all fabulous, but those 2 especially. Absolutely do it. Next up then we have 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. This book, wow. This is about romance author Eva, who by the way writes vampire erotica. Hello, what's not to love? And Shane, who is a reclusive literary star who writes award-winning novels. They shared a wild week together many, many years ago when they were teenagers, and then they unexpectedly reunite, and old wounds are opened and past passions resurface. Guys, this book felt like poetry. It's technically a second chance romance, but it's just got so much more depth to it. It touches on trauma and addiction and motherhood and love in such a raw and beautiful way. So definitely a couple of trigger warnings if you're going to read this one, but it's just so fantastically done. As a fantasy reader, you can't not love the fact that Eva writes vampire erotica as well, just as a fun little side bit. But it's sexy and emotional and just gorgeously written. It's, I think, one of my favourite books of all time. It's that good, so read this. Book number 4 then is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. Now, I don't have a physical copy of this, but it's actually one of my most recent reads. And again, I love everything that Emily Henry puts out. She's one of the few romance authors that I will always gravitate towards. She's an auto-buy author for me. But this is the latest book of hers that I have read. And honestly, I'm so annoyed that it took me so long to get to it, but never mind. We'll move on. We're past it. It's done now. And I think I chose this one. I personally think that it's the best one of hers that I've read. But like I said, I do like all of them. Now, this book is about a literary agent, Nora, and a brooding editor, Charlie, who keep running into each other when Nora and her sister go on vacation in this charming small town. They, over the course of their vacation, slowly discover that they are possibly not so different as they first thought. Now, I usually avoid rom-coms if I can. Emily Henry, of course, being the exception, but this book plays with romance tropes in such a self-aware way, and the banter is just really good. Again, it had a lot more emotional depth than I thought. There was a big discussion around how the typical fantasy or the typical small town romance trope tends to play out, where this man or woman will fall in love with someone from a small town and they'll drop everything, they'll leave their old life behind, and they'll go and live in this small town, riding off through the pastures into the sunset with their love interest and live happily ever after. But this book kind of turns it on its head, because Nora is a city girl through and through. She loves being an agent, she loves having her career, she doesn't want to settle down, she loves living in New York, so she's certainly not going to live in a small town. And it really challenges those beliefs that when you fall for someone, you have to drop everything to be with them. She is very adamant that she still wants to be a city girl and she still wants to have a career and live her life the way that she wants it, and I love that. I love that she didn't bow down to those societal pressures. And because of that, I was just so invested in how that story would play out. Plus, I always love reading books about bookish main characters, whether it be authors or editors or, you know, someone else in publishing. I just think it's so fascinating. So absolutely, yes please. This was a solid read. Next up then, we have Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. So first of all, Chloe, I could not pick it up. We have the same name. We are named twins. Of course it's going to be on this list. But this book follows Chloe Brown. Now, it's actually the first book in a trilogy, technically, but with romance trilogies, they're not the same as fantasy trilogies where you have to read them all in a certain order. Each book is its own and it can be read in any order. They're all fine standalones, but technically, this is the first one. It follows the oldest of the Brown sisters, Chloe, and she is determined to finally start living life. So she has a chronic disability and because of that lives quite a sheltered life. However, she has made a list, her Get a Life list, and she is determined to tick off everything on that list. Enter Red, her grumpy but secretly soft-hearted neighbour who ends up helping her complete the list. This book has everything. It is a grumpy sunshine trope, so if you like that sort of thing, this is the one for you. It has fantastic chronic illness rep. I think it's done in a way that's very respectful and very realistic as well to the character. And it's also a bit of a slow burn romance that actually feels like it was earned. I think it was done very, very well. Again, that's something that I usually don't like about romance books, is how quickly the romance develops. So I love a slow burn, and this is up there with the best. The chemistry between Chloe and Red is just, oh, it's so good. But what I loved most about this was how genuinely funny the book was. I laughed so much whilst I was reading it. If you like a witty, heartfelt romance, this is the one for you. I haven't continued on with the series, but the next book is in my February TBR, so I can't wait to keep going with these ones. I hope I love them as much as this one. Alright, book number 6 then. Wow, we're flying through this list. Okay, so we have The Love Wager by Lynn Painter, another genuinely funny book. So this follows main characters Hallie and Jack. Now, after a one-night stand, they become unlikely friends who make a bet. Whoever finds love first wins. But surprise, surprise, they actually might just be perfect for one another. It just takes them a while to realise it. This is just pure serotonin. This is a fake dating / friends to lovers combo, and it's so well done. The text conversations between them as well, I was obsessed. This is another one where it feels like you're just watching a rom-com, so it is absolutely perfect if you just want a quick, funny, light-hearted read. The next few books then have a little bit of a fantastical element to them. One of them's technically romantasy as well, but I did want to include some that had a little bit of magic because, after all, this is a list of romance books for fantasy lovers, so I couldn't not. Now, the first one that I have is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. So this follows two rival journalists, Iris and Roman, who start exchanging letters without realising it. Now, they live in a war-torn world, and Iris originally thinks that she's sending her letters to her brother, who's out fighting on the front lines, but then discovers that they're not actually getting delivered to him, they're getting delivered to someone else. She just doesn't know who. So throughout the course of their letter exchange, they slowly start to fall for one another. Of course, without realising it's actually their workplace rival that they are talking to. Duh. So, again, the fantasy element in this is probably why I liked it so much. But beyond that, the letter writing romance is just so cute. I think it's just such a fun way of developing that romance. It kind of gave me the Night Circus vibes a little bit, in that it was very lyrical, very atmospheric, and just beautifully written. Although, interestingly, I didn't actually enjoy the Night Circus that much. It was okay, but it wasn't like a top whatever book for me, you know. It wasn't, not making a top 10 list anytime soon, let's put it that way. However, if you want something that feels like a storybook romance, you need to read this. I haven't read the sequel yet, but I do intend on picking it up. I'm just trying to find the Fairy Loot edition to match this one. I could get the regular edition, or I could listen to it on Audible, but I'm being a little bit of a book hoarder, a bit of a book dragon, where I'm trying to find a nice pretty copy like this to match the first one so that I can keep it as a trophy on my shelf. So when I eventually do, I'll be continuing with the series. We also get to see a little bit of action in this book as well, as the two journalists end up on the front lines as well, obviously reporting what's going on in the war, and the consequences and fallout from that just make for an excellent cliffhanger, so I really, really can't wait to pick up the next one. when I eventually find it. My next book then is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. Now, I know what you're going to say. This is not technically a romance. I know that. But that's why I think it's a perfect book for a fantasy lover. So, let me explain. This book follows a pretty damn miserable caseworker who is sent to investigate a home for magical children, and in the process of doing that he finds belonging and love and a whole new family. This book feels like a hug. It's not just a romance. In fact, it's not even a romance. The romantic plot is such a minor subplot in it that it's barely there, but I think that's why it's so perfect. It's predominantly about found family and self-acceptance and opening yourself up to love in all of its forms. It has a very soft fantasy feel because, of course, it's a home for magical children. They have magical abilities. And this is why I think it's a perfect blend for everyone. I think if you're a romance reader who's trying to get into fantasy, this is a great one to pick up because, again, the fantasy elements are so subtle throughout it. And for fantasy lovers who want romance, because the romantic subplot is just so effortlessly woven into the story without overpowering it. It's beautiful. Please, please read it. It is one of my all-time favourite books, and from reading this, T.J. Klune became an auto-author for me. I love everything of his that I've read. And speaking of, the last book on this list is another of his, and it is Under the Whispering Door. Again, so well written. Now, this is about a ruthless businessman. You'll see a bit of a theme with his characters here, but he dies right at the start of the book and finds himself in a tea shop between life and death. So it's kind of a little bit like a purgatory sort of idea. And in this tea shop, he meets the kind-hearted ferryman who just changes everything. I never expected to like a book about death this much. Again, it's a little bit triggering, so just tread lightly with this one, or tread cautiously with this one. But again, it's such a soft, tender love story wrapped in a very powerful message about embracing life, and it made me cry a lot as his books always do, but in a way that felt hopeful. It was a good cry. It was a nice cathartic cry. But if you want a romance that just hits deep in the soul, this is for you. Again, it has that little bit of a fantastical element, a little bit of a magical element, because you're sort of in this in-between world between life and death. But the romance isn't the forefront of the story in either of these books, but especially in this one. It's not about the romance. It's another very subtly done minor subplot, and that's why I think it's perfect for fantasy lovers who are trying to dip their toe into the water of more contemporary type reads. Alright guys, that is my list of romance books that I actually loved as a fantasy reader. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of these books, or if you have any romance recommendations that you think I would enjoy. As always, if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel if you want to see more bookish content from me. I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys!